Welcome to ThinkTech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidel.
And I'm Donna Blanchard.
In our show this time, we'll visit the annual meeting of the Board of Governors of Pacific Forum, CSIS. That's the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
The keynote speaker for the program was Richard Armitage, former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State and co-chair of Pacific Forum. The other co-chair is Dr. Joseph S. Nye, Jr. of the Kennedy School of Government and former Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Pacific Forum is part of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a think tank based in Washington, D.C.
Pacific Forum was founded by Admiral Joe Vasey as a think tank foreign policy center covering the Asia-Pacific region. Now under the direction of President Ralph Cosa, it has become that and more, with an increasingly global reach.
Every year, Pacific Forum invites its supporters to its Board of Governors meeting, and this year was no exception. The meeting was held at the Sheraton Waikiki, and some 400 people attended. It was an impressive group.
The Pacific Forum Board itself is a who's who of business, military, and foreign policy, and includes Mary Bitterman, Brenda Foster, Admiral Ronald Hayes, Dave Heenan, James Kelly, Warren Luke, Lauren Moriarty, Gene Rolls, Charles Salmon, Howard Stevenson, Barbara Tanabe, and Admiral Zap Zlatiper, among others. Learn about Pacific Forum and check them all out on csis.org.
The keynote speaker for the evening was Richard Armitage, former Deputy Secretary of State and co-chair of Pacific Forum. He is well informed on American foreign policy around the world and candid in his views.
ThinkTech was fortunate enough to have had Richard Armitage on our Asia in Review talk show, hosted by Bill Sharp the day before. Here are excerpts from that show.
You said it's really the rebalance and not the pivot. Why do you prefer the term rebalance?
Well, it was, I think it's more faithful to what the administration wanted. They wanted to rebalance out of two unpopular wars, both Iraq and Afghanistan, and also to rebalance within Asia, not to have a sole focus on Northeast Asia, but also to spend so much warranted time thinking about the things in Southeast Asia and indeed the South Pacific. So it's a much, I think, more descriptive term.
Is the rebalance successful?
Mr. Sharp, I think it's mixed. We initially moved in the security field only, and because we could move assets quickly and expand radar to Japan, Marines to Darwin, Australia, but we didn't move with our whole of government concept, and that is trade and exchanges and education and cultural involvement. And it left the impression in certain minds, certainly the Chinese, that we were only interested in containment. So I think it took us a long time to get our act together so we could have a whole of government approach. And now the irony is that we're on the verge of, I think, a successful rebalancing, but unless we get TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, even if we rebalanced in an absolutely correct manner, we'll get a D- for the course if we don't get TPP. If on the other hand, we continue to rebalance in a chaotic and way, but got TPP, we'll probably get a B+ for the course. So that's how important this trade agreement is.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, I was going to ask that a little bit later, but since we're there now, let's go for it. What's going to happen with TPP? We need TPA first, right, to give the president fast-track authority, and then if he can get that, TPP seems like it will come along pretty naturally, but it's...
Well, I don't know. I think I give it about a 55 to 60% chance of a positive solution to TPP. We had one break recently. Senator Ted Cruz, one of the darlings of the Tea Party, announced that he was for TPA. He was.
Okay.
And that's a break in the ranks of the Tea Party. And the strange bedfellows are involved in opposing this trade agreement. It's the liberal left and the Tea Party right. And whether they have a big enough center of gravity to oppose the president's will, and what I think is good for this country, and certainly for others in 12 total negotiating partners.
And now, here are some excerpts from the remarks Richard Armitage made at the Pacific Forum Board of Governors meeting. As you will note, he was no less candid.
what you really want to hear is not me, but Rich Armitage. So I once at a meeting said, and now a man who needs no introduction.
You know, a couple years ago, I stood here and I criticized the rebalancing. Not the fact of, because I think the rebalancing is very much reflective of our national interest. But I criticized the way in which it was done, sort of haphazardly, offhandedly, not very thoughtful way we moved. We moved only in the security area because we could move that way. We didn't take the time to move in the cultural and the educational and the trade area. Well, we've changed that now, and I think we are having a much more balanced approach to Asia Pacific. But here's the irony. We've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if we had done the rebalancing in an absolutely horrible way, completely uncoordinated, but we got TPP, we're going to get a B+ for the course. If, on the other hand, we did everything right, everything correct, and we don't get the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we're going to get a D- for that course. And that's just the facts. When an American talks about Asia Pacific, I think we are duty-bound to talk first about Japan, because it is Japan and our relationship with Japan which allows us to function in the security area in a very meaningful way. And now there are various views of Prime Minister Abe, but I'm going to give you one. If you can name another democratically elected leader who has accomplished in his first 2 years 1/2 of what Mr. Abe has done, then I'll carry your bags. And I'm not going to give you a complete list. But look, a National Security Council, a National Secrets Act, putting more money into defense, a cabinet decision on collective self-defense, fired his 3 arrows of Yamaguchi, etc. The relaxation of the principles that previously prohibited export of arms sales. He's done a ton of things, but the one thing he's done above all else has been, in my view, indefatigable diplomacy, except in China and Korea, which has their own historical reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. But what he has done in his first 2 years in the diplomatic area is staggering. And now he's going to come to Washington. And he's going to come at the end of the month of April. And I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe he's going to give a speech to a joint session of Congress. There'll be very high expectations of Mr. Abe when he gives this speech. Many are going to be expecting him to speak very boldly about TPP and his willingness to complete the negotiation, which after all is the most important negotiating partner we have in the TPP arrangement. But he's also going to be expected to put to rest historical issues. And I'm going to be specific on the question of comfort women in just a minute. But there are those in the area who like to say that Mr. Abe is nothing but a right-wing nationalist who doesn't accept the outcome of the Cairo Declaration or the Potsdam Declaration. I disagree with that. He does accept it. But occasionally, some of those that surround him in Japan say things that they shouldn't ought to have said. Now, on the question of comfort women, I want to talk about Korea and our relationship in a minute. I know how neuralgic this issue is in Korea, and for that matter, it's neuralgic in Tokyo as well. But you know, our country apologizes for the way we treated one segment of our population, and we will apologize for another 100 years, and that's the way we treated African Americans. Oh, and by the way, our country apologizes and will continue to apologize for another 100 years for the way we treated another segment of our population, American Indians. And you know what? We'll apologize now, and we'll be apologizing for another 100 years for the way we treated another segment of our population. That would be Japanese Americans. So there's nothing wrong with a sincere apology. This was not a government policy of Japan. No one has ever said that has any credibility. But at war, bad things happen. And I was a young soldier once, and young soldiers can do things that are wrong. So I sincerely hope that when Mr. Abe comes to Washington, he will be able to address these issues squarely, head on. A bit about the Republic of Korea. Recently, Mrs. Park has recovered from a bit of a slump. Her popularity is back up, I heard today at lunch, in some measure because of her reaction after the slashing of our ambassador, Mark Lippert. and her gestures and actions in the wake of that very much appreciated, I think, by most Americans who are aware. But she's had a tough go. First of all, a one-term president, 1 5-year term, that's tough. Because from day 2, you're a lame duck. And Korean politics are rough. They're real rough. This is not a sport for the timid. And number 3, she ran into, through no fault of her own, some difficult headwinds with the terrible tragedy of the seawall, the ferry, and several others, a subway accident and a nursing home fire, all of which were, for wrong reasons, laid at her doorstep. Now things seem to be improving a bit. You know, there's a lot that's written and said about the Japan-Korea relationship, and it needs to be fixed. It must be fixed. It's uncomfortable, particularly for Americans, when it's not fixed. But, you know, I'm not going to get hyperbolic about it, because if you think about Japan and Korea's relationship since normalization 50 years ago, it's been a real sine curve. Who can remember when Kim Dae-jung was kidnapped from a hotel in Tokyo? Oh, relationship really went in the tank. Or when a Japanese would-be assassin, well, indeed assassin, tried to assassinate Park Chung-hee and did assassinate his wife. So we've had ups and downs in this relationship. But there are several ironies and difficulties that exist here. First, there's something, I think, in Korean DNA about Japan. If you look at the 2 biggest holidays, as my friend Victor Cha would say, the 2 biggest holidays in Seoul, you see it's Independence Day and Liberation Day, both which are directed right at Japan. And goodness sakes, on both sides of the Sea of Japan, or the East Sea, whatever you prefer, politicians have no penalty for speaking rudely or roughly about each other. It's safe ground. They can criticize each other without any fear of being criticized themselves by their own population. And the biggest irony of all is when the United States has a good relationship with Korea and a good relationship with Japan, it seems as if those 2 great nations feel free to have a bad relationship with each other. It is when Japan and Korea feel that we may be moving on, passing the famous Japan passing or Korea passing, that it forces the 2 of them together to some extent. Now, there are some in Washington particularly who criticize the Park administration for moving too close to China. I'm not one of them. It's a fact that Mrs. Park and President Xi Jinping have met on 4 or 5 occasions, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, in my view. Given the economic weight of China and the importance to Korea, it's understandable, given that Chinese tourists are the main tourists who visit Seoul and South Korea. It's understandable. But I believe the reason Mrs. Park is doing this is not because she wants to trade our relationship for another. She wants to be sure that China will use as much influence as China has to better the situation vis-a-vis North Korea. China's influence is limited with North Korea. At least my discussions with Chinese officials lead me to believe that they're not very enthusiastic about the North Korean regime, but it's what it is. And we're all stuck with it. I don't know what to tell you about Kim Jong-un, other than he's got a hell of a haircut now. I don't know if you've seen that. It's awesome. But beyond that, a fellow who seems to be putting his relatives and in-laws in positions of power is a fellow that seems to me to lack a certain amount of confidence. And now on to China. I have had the opportunity to often visit China. I've often had the opportunity to visit in March. We have the National People's Congress. Generally a relatively cheery time, not this year. Not this year. This year, the economic data is not that good. The economic news is not that good. This doesn't give anybody any comfort. But the fact of the matter is, China is awash in debt, 282% of their GDP, swimming in overcapacity, with limited opportunities right now for growth. And that's a tough thing for China to face after 20 years of rapid growth. And I think expectations were quite high in the population's minds about the continued growth. Prime Minister Li Keqiang said maybe they'll make 7%. I don't think so. I hope they do, but I don't think they will. So it leads me to a couple of conclusions. The first is that leadership of Xi Jinping is very strong and very bold, but I think the country as a whole lacks a certain amount of confidence. A country which keeps a Nobel Prize winner in prison is not a confident country. One that has so much money in the People's Armed Police, which could be, it is not now, but it could be an item of repression. That's not confident. It's not confident. And a country who people with means are trying to immigrate, it speaks a certain lack of confidence. I'm not one of those who wants to see a fractured, bumptious China. I want a successful China. I want a China that plays by the same rules that we all play by. Now, the U.S.-China relationship is a tough one. On the one hand, we have any number of committees, abilities to talk to each other. We've got the famous strategic and economic dialogue where many ministers from both sides can get together a couple times a year. We've got mill-to-mill talks. We've got all kinds of things. But do we have a close relationship? No. Right beneath the surface. It's not troubled, it's just not going anywhere. It's just not going anywhere. I believe that there are many in China who believe that the United States is intent on removing the Communist Party of China. Nothing, as far as I know, could be farther from the case. In fact, our history of dealing with authoritarian regimes is one that would lead one to believe that we go along for as long as necessary until the people of China make their own decision on what sort of future they want. But I don't believe many in the leadership of China think that way. Now, there are ways that we could cooperate today. Maybe in the military sphere, it'll take a little while to develop the mutual trust and confidence, but in the environmental sphere, we both need the help. In the fight against infectious diseases, we both can use each other for the betterment of the region and the globe. A couple other words about some in Asia. First of all, a real shout out to Singapore, their 50th anniversary. If you think about where Singapore was 50 years ago and where they are today, wow, pretty unbelievable now. The fact of the matter is they had a relatively contained problem, small population, but they've done it. And they've done it their way, and as I say, congratulations for 50 years of really good citizenship and citizenry. Thailand, unfortunately, is going the other way. The disturbance of democracy is something that bothers all of us, and I don't see it going to fix itself anytime soon. And the United States is yelling and screaming and mewling and carping about the need to have a date certain for a democratic election. Is falling on deaf ears right now. There are several other things that have to happen first. One is succession to His Majesty. So I think we'd be better advised to keep a low profile.
We were able to interview some of the attendees and organizers after the program, including Bill Sharp, our Asian Review host, Kali Akina, another one of our ThinkTech hosts, and Ralph Kosa, the director of Pacific Forum.
Ambassador Armitage made a lot of interesting points. One was that he really wants to see the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, pass, which will be crucial to maintain U.S. leadership in East Asia. However, he gave it somewhere between a 50 and 60% chance. I think this is crucially important to the United States. It became very interesting, I think, in his speech that he is somewhat skeptical about Sino-U.S. relations. He's somewhat skeptical about the, shall we call it, the veracity of China. He talked about the fact that China has experiencing 280% debt. That is relative to its GDP. That's extremely high.
What I enjoyed was the opportunity to hear him discuss some highlights about different countries and our relationship to them as the United States. But a real bonus was the opportunity for the audience to participate in a question and answer session, and Armitage was in fine form. He did say, let's not keep insisting that the United States call itself indispensable to the welfare of other nations.
Great night. got a chance to see a lot of really good people that I haven't seen for a while, as I've been overseas living in Thailand for the past 17 months. So delighted to see old friends, delighted to hear Rich Armitage's views. We agree on about 80%, we disagree on about 20%, but he's always colorful, even in those 20% of the time when he's wrong, when he disagrees with me. He's still colorful and interesting to hear.
Well, I thought tonight was just an inspiring evening. Rich Armitage is always very inspiring and very candid and hard-hitting and doesn't pull any punches, and I think the audience appreciates that. I think if I can brag a little, that's one of the values that Pacific Forum brings to the community here in Hawaii, is we bring in people like Armitage and Joe Nye and John Hamre and others who can tell you straight what's going on. And he had no problem criticizing Democrats, but also no problem criticizing Republicans and Congress in general.
As you can see, the meeting of the Board of Governors was quite successful, and the remarks and Q&A conversation with Richard Armitage were most interesting and provocative.
We look forward to covering other Pacific Forum events through the year and talk shows with its think tank foreign policy staff. We also look forward to receiving its PACnet newsletters and, of course, attending its Board of Governors meeting next year.
More and more, Hawaii is becoming an international meeting place in the Pacific, and Pacific Forum is part of that growth. This will provide substantial and lasting benefit for our state and, in fact, our nation, and we should treat it as an important priority for Hawaii.
I don't think, particularly here in Hawaii, we pay enough attention to international relations and foreign policy. And, our newspapers seem to want to, focus. If it isn't about tourism, they're really not interested. And yet you heard some very good, very penetrating questions that demonstrate people's A, awareness of what's going on, and B, concern about what's going on. And we really need to have more of a dialogue here and more interaction. So we're delighted that we're part of that and that we're able to provide that to the Hawaiian community, and certainly would like to see more of it.
And now, let's take a look at our ThinkTech calendar of events going forward.
The big news is that ThinkTech has launched 2 new news shows: our daily ThinkTech News with Donna Blanchard and Radar News with Sachi Slomov. Stay current with ThinkTech News.
ThinkTech News can be streamed live during the day. We broadcast both the Daily News and Radar News between our talk shows. Check out our revamped website to see more about our shows, our upcoming luncheons, and more.
ThinkTech broadcasts its talk shows live on the internet from noon to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon. If you missed a show or you want to replay or share any show, they're all archived on YouTube.
Visit thinktechhawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links, or to join our email list and get these links and program advisories on our upcoming shows.
We also invite you to be part of our live audience in our downtown studio in Pioneer Plaza. Contact me, Jay at thinktechhawaii.com. Raise your awareness in every way on ThinkTech.
April 16th, ThinkTech will present a program entitled Offshore Investments in Hawaii and How We Can Better Manage Them.
We'll discuss some of the offshore investments that have been made or attempted in our state and some of those that are now pending. And we'll examine how Hawaii can better deal with these investments in the future.
Join us for this important program. Understand and help us figure out how we can achieve win-win deals with investments from far away. Be a part of it and sign up to attend on thinktechhawaii.com. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of ThinkTech. But first, we want to thank our underwriters.
Okay, Donna, that wraps up this week's edition of ThinkTech. Remember, you can watch ThinkTech on OC16 several times every week. Can't get enough of it, just like Donna does. For additional times, check out OC16.tv.
Definitely, Jay. For lots more ThinkTech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on ThinkTech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a guest or volunteer, a producer or intern, and help us reach Hawaii.
Thanks so much for joining us each week on ThinkTech and for supporting tech, energy diversification, and globalism in Hawaii. You can watch this show throughout the week and tune in next Sunday evening for our next important weekly episode. I'm Jay Fidel. Aloha, everyone.
And I'm Donna Blanchard. See you center stage.